You're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM in Bridgeport and streaming online at wpkn.org. Reporting and supporting what matters, this is CT Examiner Weekly.
The National Wildlife Refuge System is the single largest network of land dedicated solely to the conservation of wildlife in the world. 95 million land acres, 759 million acres of coastal waters, with refuges in all 50 states. Here in Connecticut, the Steward B McKinney Wildlife Refuge stretches 70 miles from Calf Island in Greenwich to Salt Meadow in Westbrook. The National Wildlife Refuge System is sometimes called the National Park Next Door, and you've probably never heard of it. I'm Greg Stroud, editor of CT Examiner, and that's the topic of this week's Roundtable.
And I'm your host, Brian Scott Smith, and joining me, along with Greg, are two special guests talking about the NWRS. Welcome to you all. Whether it's strip mines, climate change, or invasive species, it seems like our natural world is constantly under attack. And if it wasn't for the efforts of wildlife groups and environmentalists, much of it would be gone already. But should we be including budgets and inflation to the list of problems? Joining us today is Desiree Sorenson-Groves, President and CEO of the National Wildlife Refuge Association, and Mark Seth Lender, a writer, nature photographer, and regular contributor to CT Examiner. Welcome to you both. Desiree, I want to start with you. Can you tell us a little about what your organization does and what our listeners should know right now about what's happening with the National Wildlife Refuge System?
Well, thanks so much for having me. The organization that I run is called the National Wildlife Refuge Association, and we are an organization, a nonprofit that's been around for 51 years. We were formed in 1975 by retired refuge managers who looked at what was happening around the refuge system and thought there needed to be more done to protect wildlife conservation. As you mentioned, the refuge system is the world's largest system of lands and waters set aside for wildlife conservation. And it's hard right now. There's so many challenges, from climate change to human population growth, pollution, invasive species, and everything that is impacting our natural world is also impacting our wildlife that coexists on our planet with us. And our organization is dedicated to protecting these national wildlife refuges for the benefit of wildlife, but also for the American people.
I just want to put a little bit of context around this just for the listeners. The National Wildlife Refuge System is managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and it's over 100 years old. It's around 123 years old. So I suppose my question to you is, I appreciate how long your organization's been going, but why is it that people don't seem to know about this particular system? We know about other things. We know about national parks, etc., which were probably, sort of like brought about at the same type of time frame as the refuge system. So why do we not know about this more?
It's a good question. We often say that national wildlife refuges are America's best kept secret because so many Americans don't know they exist, yet they are right next door. They're in everyone's backyards. It could be because it's a place where wildlife is the priority and wildlife comes first. It is for the enjoyment of the American people, but it's where wildlife is the priority. And our other sister public lands, the National Park Service, the Forest Service, and the Bureau of Land Management lands, have different priorities, and you may know them a little bit more, especially national parks. We all know our national parks because they're a little bit more iconic. But refuges are local. They're in your backyard. They're also, I would say, interestingly, they're lower and wetter. They're more about biodiversity than, say, a scenic vista. Although there are beautiful vistas in lots of national wildlife refuges, that's not the primary purpose. The primary purpose is habitat, which may not be something, if you're not a bird watcher or a hunter or an angler, you might not know that much about it because you're not perhaps a major user of those lands and waters.
I just want to redirect this, I guess, to our local expert, Mark Seth Lender, because I think he's, whether it's in boats or whether it's on land, I think he probably goes to some of these refuges. He goes to, certainly in Connecticut, pretty much every week, maybe every day. And so what's happening in Connecticut? Like, what kinds of birds or animals, what's happening right now in this sort of 70-mile stretch of land along the Connecticut coast?
Well, I think I have to start with a disclaimer. My office window looks out on the Steward B. McKinney National Wildlife Refuge, which is our resident refuge. And I really don't have to make much of an effort. I'm there. But I think with that view and with that vista, first of all, I think the first comment I would make is on the beauty of it, of what I see. I see the weather coming in across Long Island Sound, constantly changing light on the ocean. I see flocks of birds, sometimes distant enough I can't tell what they are, but you see them in flight and you see particular flight patterns. And after a while, many of those, just by their wing beats, become clear to you, identifiable to you. In a winter like the one we just had, which was rather harsh and for an extended period of time, I had sea ducks come in that I have literally never seen before. We had a long-tailed duck about a week ago, never had one in close. I had and wrote about for Connecticut Examiner 2 greater shearwater, another bird I've never seen except miles from land and usually farther north. So there's a constant and extraordinary stream of things to be seen if you're there to see them. I think that the point Desiree made about this being for wildlife, I think there is a larger issue also, which is that human existence depends on the same factors which support the existence of wildlife. We are, after all, another animal. The idea that we can continue to survive if nature vanishes is completely false. And I think that there's a subtext of that. And I think that there is no limit to the amount of pushback we should offer at that point of view. It's deadly. Our survival depends on it. If we come back now to the particulars about why you want to know the Steward B. McKinney, let's consider the amount of wildlife that exists in this very urban and suburban state of Connecticut. We're equidistant, about 100 miles each way from Greater Boston and from the city of New York. And we have moose, we have mountain lion, we have bobcat, we have deer, we have river otters, we have beaver, we have all kinds of fish. Huge schools of menhaden come in to visit us in various stages of growth. We have tautog, we have black sea bass. Anglers advantage these things. Schools of stripers, sometimes even schools of bonita. And so it's very, very wildlife rich. I think that given the chance, nature thrives in this manner. Places like the McKinney provide a safe point for critical habitat that keeps all this together.
Can you give us, the listeners, or give us a sense of what might have changed and from over the last decade or two? And maybe Desiree can tell us as well, like, why are we talking about this now? Are we in a different situation now than we were 20 years ago or 30 years ago? Or what are you seeing on the sort of not on the nature level, but maybe on the organizational level with the refuge system?
Well, the refuge system is constantly under assault financially. It's constantly trying to piece together with the help of friends groups. Our friends group is somewhat new and just getting off the ground and not as well funded as some. But there's not enough staff. There's not enough money. We have 5 people managing all these salt marshes, 11 islands, the 70, 80 miles of coastline. the endangered tern colonies that the refuge is responsible for. It's too much.
I just want to interrupt. Sorry, I just want to clarify something for the listeners. When Mark said there's 5 people, that's obviously not you, the supporters. You're talking about US Fish and Wildlife federal staff who are actually looking after this, correct?
Yes.
So that's we just need to clarify that, that it's actually not volunteers who are doing the work. It's actually paid federal workers, but there just aren't a lot of them. I want to put this question to you, Mark, and we need to move this along because we've only got a short amount of time to talk about this. Why should we care? People who are listening to this are going to be saying, look, I'm economically strapped. There's all sorts of things happening in my life. Why should I care about this?
I think when you're economically strapped, it's very difficult to care. We have to be honest about that. But I also think that on a broader sense, those of us who can afford to care need to, because, and this comes back to the point I made earlier, I think that this is a survival issue.
Desiree, yeah, you got a point.
Here's an interesting thing. While it may be difficult to care about places like this when you're strapped and you're trying to figure out how to put food on your table, at the same time, one of the reasons these lands and waters exist is exactly for that reason. Some of the earliest national wildlife refuges were set aside as places for people to hunt and fish, to find food at times when it was very difficult. And that is still the case now. These are public lands and waters where the vast majority are open for hunting and fishing. That's a very interesting and unique thing to our country that many other countries don't have. And I would actually say that this public land, it's such an American value. It's who we are as a nation. So yes, it can be hard to think about protecting these places at a time when you're financially strapped. We also sort of can't afford not to. It's a part of our ethos as who we are as Americans, hearkening back to our founding fathers who were, annoyed when in England, where, a lot of folks came from, where, you'd be killed if you were hunting on the king's land. So it goes back to exactly who we are as Americans. And as we celebrate our 250th anniversary of our nation, to me, it's more important now than ever to have public lands and waters like these.
Greg.
I think that going to the cost of and the pressures, financial pressures, unlike say going to Yosemite or Yellowstone, I mean, you don't have to buy a ticket to go to Steward B. McKinney. It helps to have a boat, but you can drive and walk around on the shoreline, and this is it's right there. It's probably 15 minutes away from most of the population in Connecticut. And it's largely free.
Well, the point that you make there is this is nature next door. And that's literally the case. And as to what Desiree just said, it's true. I see people in very small old boats out fishing on a regular basis, and that fish gets consumed, not sold. I see people out hunting, and what they hunt, what they capture, gets consumed, not sold. This is stuff that supports people. And you don't need tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment to do it. Some people spend that, but I've seen people just come down asking if they can fish off my beach into the McKinney waters, and I always say yes.
I want to raise a question actually about the hunting thing, because we're talking about a system which is the preservation of wildlife, and now we're talking about hunting. So how does that fit, Desiree? Because again, to listeners, that's going to be like, hang on a minute, you're supposed to be preserving things, but then you allow people to go on there and hunt and fish, etc.
It can seem a little odd until you think about how wildlife conservation came about in our country, and really the first pieces of conserving wildlife was not for wildlife's sake. It was really so that we were protecting species that we used for game. And that started in the, and not just for game, but also say for the millinery trade. That's actually how the refuge system started. 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt was getting lobbied by his friends and family in New England. So the whole refuge system started in New England, specifically Massachusetts. And the earliest Audubon societies lobbied President Roosevelt to do something about all the bird slaughter, mainly in Florida, for the millinery trade. And that's sort of the first pieces. Teddy Roosevelt sets aside about 55 of these. He called them bird reservations. We now call them refuges. But over time, these places are also becoming important to protect hunting places for the American people. In the 1930s, we had the Dust Bowl going across the United States. At that time, you couldn't go out and just go hunt ducks or bear or moose or elk. We had a real problem in our country, and we decided that we had to do something about it. And the refuge system is the piece that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service said we've got to set aside places. So they went along like migratory corridors. So the entire East Coast, the Mississippi River, the Central Flyway, which goes through like Nebraska, that area, and then the Pacific Flyway. We set aside these areas for migratory birds, not just waterfowl, but birds. And then we also set aside some big places, like at the time there was a place called the National Bison Range, National Elk Refuge. We set aside these places for big game and birds, mainly that were hunted, but also we knew that the numbers were dwindling. We probably would not have bison in the United States without two things. One is the National Bison Range that Theodore Roosevelt created. The other was the Bronx Zoo, which the Wildlife Conservation Society helped. But a lot of these stories people don't know. I know, growing up, my family didn't hunt that much, but I had a lot of friends who did. And it can seem odd that if you're a non-hunter, that hunting is such a piece of conservation, but it is. We in the United States probably would not have the conservation lands that we do for wildlife without hunters. And I will say, if you're a duck hunter, you have to buy a little stamp. You can buy it at the post office. It's called a duck stamp, or I'm sorry, that's what we call it, the jargon. It's actually called the Migratory Bird Hunting and Conservation Stamp. Started in the 1930s by the Fish and Wildlife Service. And if you want to hunt ducks, you have to buy this stamp. And it's, $25. And of that, 98 cents of every dollar goes toward buying habitat. While it's for waterfowl, it helps all species.
I get that point, and with hunting as well and with invasive species. So I think we can put two and two together and get where you're going from with that. Mark, you've got a point.
The problem is not the use for hunting. Hunters pay their way. The problem is that many other uses don't. And in particular, I would point to wildlife photographers. I'm one. To take really high quality wildlife photographs, if you're putting this forward for the public in any kind of semi-professional way, is tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment on which I pay no tax. There's been talk of this. There's been great pushback. I don't agree with that pushback. If I can put a $10,000 lens on my camera, I should be able to throw $1,000 at the National Wildlife Refuge System. And I feel fairly strongly about that. So to sum that up, it's not that hunters are not part of the conservation pictures, that the photographers and the wildlife people who are making some kind of a career out of this are not.
Desiree, sorry, Greg, you had a point.
I guess to ask Desiree, I mean, you see in Washington what's happening, but I think for us in Connecticut, we really have no idea. So can you give us a sense of what you're hearing from, whether it's people in Congress or it's interest groups there, that whether it's Audubon or the NRA or Ducks Unlimited, or what are people talking about? What's happening now? Are there any bills or any funding things that people should know about? Should they be calling their Congress people saying, this matters to me?
Thank you for that. There's a big thing, the annual appropriations that run the refuge system, and the organizations you just mentioned are actually all organizations that support the refuge system. So, Ducks Unlimited, Audubon, National Wildlife Federation, Delta Waterfowl. These are big organizations who support the refuge system because they care about wildlife conservation. So annual appropriations over the past 15 years have gone down about 33%. The refuge system has been decimated, and it's not like they were doing really great even at that time. During that time, they've lost, from 2010 to 2024, end of 2024, they had lost about 30% of their staff as well. then in the past 1 year, they've lost another 20 to 25% of their staff nationwide. So if you go to a National Wildlife Refuge and there are 3 staff, that's pretty amazing, because staffing has been decimated across the refuge system. It's been a brain drain. It's been an inability to get work done. So please don't blame the folks in the brown uniform when you see them. They're doing the best they can. What you can do is talk to your members of Congress about increasing funding for the refuge system. That's an annual appropriation, but there are other things. President Trump passed the Great American Outdoors Act 5 years ago. That's up to be reauthorized. It actually went for money for maintenance on all of our public lands, so national parks, national wildlife refuges. That portion of it is called the Resources Legacy Fund, which can be reauthorized. That's a huge piece to help maintain what is on the refuge system: trails and buildings, bathrooms, the places that make it comfortable for people to be on the land. So those are 2 big things: just annual appropriations, it's desperately needed, and some little pieces that can help, such as the Resources Legacy Fund.
Desiree, I just want to pick up on something. You mentioned a time frame of how this has dwindled, and that's gone across, Democrat and Republican sort of like legislators and administrations in this country. So, they're both responsible for this. So how do we get them to rethink this? Because, without getting overly political, we know that the current administration is cutting back on many, many things. But like I said, this has also been a Democrat issue as well, and they've also not stepped up to the plate.
You're so right. I'm glad you caught that, because, as you said, this has spanned multiple administrations and multiple Congresses where both parties have been in charge. And wildlife conservation just hasn't been as important as other things. So, in the past few years, you've seen other priorities come up, like climate change. And climate change is a really big deal. I'm not saying it's not, but not at the expense of protecting these areas, because if you're protecting them, it's actually a pretty cheap date. You're actually helping sequester carbon, you're helping mitigate flooding, you're helping actually wetlands on the coast, you're minimizing the damages from hurricanes and storms. We're actually saving money by investing in places like national wildlife refuges. So, we have a finite amount of money in our country, but the truth is the refuge system is, as I said, a cheap date. We're talking, they're funded at around $500 million right now. That's a pittance. The other land agencies are multiple times more than that, and they're not funded well. So don't think that I think that any land management agency is funded well, because they're not. But it is a value of our country, and I think as we as Americans stand up and talk about it more to our elected officials, that's the way. It's the squeaky wheel gets the grease. This is our country. We have the ability as Americans to stand up and talk about this stuff. And our members of Congress will listen. And the great thing is, refuges are bipartisan. If you look at the people who support refuges, they are not red and they're not blue, because they're red, white, and blue. Everyone who supports refuges come from all different walks of life and all different political spectrums.
Mark, you had a point.
I actually queried last year every congressman and every representative in the state of Connecticut. 2 of them, to their credit, Rosa DeLauro and actually Chris Murphy, did a little research on their own. I know that was the case. They probably got stymied by the then by Fish and Wildlife Service, who told them everything was fine. But that local office, by the way, has now gone the way of all flesh. It's been closed, and the whole Northeast Regional Center has been eliminated. So that portion of the pushback is no longer there. But I got no response. I think that if the public listening to this very program wants to do something in the state of Connecticut that would be of value, it would be to do what I just did and ask specifically, what legislation are you, Senator, are you, Congressman, going to create and support and put forward that will help keep the Steward B. McKinney, our National Wildlife Refuge, alive?
The problem we have, and you're absolutely right, Mark, I mean, we should be pressing our legislators more. The problem that we have now, of course, is we're in a short session. So any chance of getting any bill pushed through this year is completely off the table.
I wasn't talking about this year. What I'm really referring to is the fact the midterms are coming up. And if there's ever a point when any of these people were under pressure, this is it. And when they're already under pressure, that's the time to add more. And that's probably true nationwide.
Yeah, point well made. Greg.
And this is a stretch for Connecticut. I mean, we're talking a 70-mile wildlife refuge in one of the most densely populated, one of the actually wealthiest areas in the country. And it's protecting that real estate with this softer shoreline. It's providing sort of mental health. We hear that in Darien. Actually, they say, can't we, our children are under so much pressure. Can we take them someplace? Can they go out for walks? Can they be in nature just to detoxify, just to, be more human? And that's right. I mean, we're talking right there. It's as close to most of our listeners as the Northeast Corridor, frankly. And from Westbrook, from Calf Island in Greenwich to Salt Meadow in Westbrook. It's quite a stretch, and it's actually, I have to say, it's one of the prettiest. I mean, you get out there on the water, and there's no place prettier that I know of in the United States.
Desiree, you wanted to make a point.
Well, I was going to say, people always ask me, what's my favorite national wildlife refuge? And I always say the last one that I visited. So I totally understand what you're saying, Greg. I would say there's also in Connecticut, you've got the Silvio Oconte National Fish and Wildlife Refuge, which spans the entire Connecticut River watershed and 4 states. So and you may be visiting someplace. Maybe you fly into Denver. Here's an interesting thing. When you fly into Denver, there's this if you fly in at night, there's this big black blob as you land. Well, that's a National Wildlife Refuge. That's the Rocky Mountain Arsenal National Wildlife Refuge. It's called an arsenal because it's where we stockpiled our ammunitions during World War II, believe it or not. It's an urban refuge, but it's actually also has bison on it. It's a bison reintroduction place. There's really unique places. You can go find a refuge by putting in your zip code at fishandwildlifeservice.gov/visit-us. So it's pretty easy. I'm sure you could just Google it. But there are refuges so many different places, and you can find units that are close to you. So like the Conte Refuge, as I call it, which spans these 4 states and the Connecticut River watershed, has different units and places to visit and, different things to do at different places. And a lot of these are handicap accessible. I know the previous manager there who, a wonderful gentleman, it's a little story, but he was in a motorcycle accident when he was young, and he was paralyzed for a bit. And he realized how important it is to have handicap accessible places. And so the people who are running these places, now he's retired, but in places like this, you have people who really understand how to connect with nature as a place for solitude or a place to find your peace. These are places in your communities to do just that, where you can find that solitude, that peace. We as humans, we need it. Our organization is the Refuge Association, so refugeassociation.org. We're a nonprofit, and you can learn about ways we can teach you and show you how to get involved at your local refuge to volunteer. Perhaps you want to get dirty, you want to pull invasive species, or you want to get in there and do things. This is the thing that you can do. And we can also talk to you about the best ways to connect to local friends groups, like the Friends of the Steward B. McKinney Refuge, and get involved in that manner as well.
Desiree Sorenson-Groves, ever so many thanks. That's all for this edition. To my thanks to Greg, to you, Desiree, and also to Mark. Don't forget to check out the digital pages of ctexaminer.com for more stories and our events calendar for all the latest local happenings. And while you're there, why not subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on all the week's news? It's just $20 for the year. This is CT Examiner Weekly, reporting and supporting what matters. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thank you for listening.